Alright, so I'm just doing another recording. This will be my third of the morning. I'm not sure why they're running out. Just a bad tech day, I would argue. It kind of looks like I'm not very well focused on the middle of the screen there. It is the nature of this lens, is a big zoom lens. I believe I've got the microphone turned up in such a way that my bounce voice, I should be clear. So we're just testing out Hogwarts' new Ngreedia DE-OPTIMISed patch. That is, the last PC patch came out many months ago, before the PS5 Pro patch came out that fixed all the ray tracing in the game. From the launch version that was broken and had all sorts of seam issues. Like they basically, users complained that ultra settings ran poorly, so they reduced the math effectiveness of the ray tracing, and it just, all of a sudden it was leaking around all doors and everything. Anyway, they fixed it on the PS5 Pro version. But they'd made the game go end of life prior to that. And, oh my lord, okay. Steam is just horrible, Windows is just horrible. They've destroyed my Switch Pro controller from working the way it used to work. I actually just rebooted this game in the hope that this would be fixed. But it isn't. And so I'm not doing any upscaling. The game is still not using my VRAM correctly. And the size of the update was huge. I get the feeling they've reworked all of the textures and everything in the game to be in a format that's probably supportive of Nvidia and DLSS and whatnot. But to say all the frame rates are much worse than I used to get, and I'm now running with ray tracing settings lower. Like I'm actually now lowering my settings, trying to make this game work. But Microsoft as a platform holder are antagonistic. The issues to get my Switch controller up and running again, nightmaric. This game not using my VRAM correctly, as was the last PC patch they put out. So I briefly shot up to 15 gig and then it cleared back down to 12 gig. And now look, there's 15 gig, there's 13 gig, there's 15 gig, there's 13 gig, right? Can anyone imagine how hard my back-end systems are currently working, trying to keep aspects of this game in memory? They're 14 gig, 13 gig. Why is it culling so hard? Why is it loading up so hard and then dumping it so hard? And it's just a nightmare. I mean, I'm hovering around 13 gig a lot of the time. I was seeing it go down to 12 and 11 before, while running around in town. So they've certainly come up with ways to make it run poorly. I used to have the game tweaked so that my low frame rates basically stayed at 30. Right? I saw when I first got the game that due to CPU loading running through the middle of Hogsmeade, my low frame rate was about 35 frames a second. And so I tuned the entire game knowing what my low frame rate would be, so that I wouldn't speed up to 60 and then slow down to 30. So I basically lock it at 30. And then I use frame doubling to make it run at 60 so that latencies on controllers don't feel, my wireless controller is quite nice. Otherwise I had to play on keyboard and mouse. But now my 30 lows are nowhere near 30 lows, and it's because the Nvidia way of doing ray tracing tries to move some of it onto the CPU. And I'm seeing my CPU is being hit a lot harder, but it seems to be, it's done in a way where it's not using free or available cores, but the ones that affect the low frame rate. Basically it's just make it work worse on the competitor's cards type scenario. Like just there, it's a frame rate dump that, there we go, 12 gig of VRAM used. And it dumped it so badly and dropped my frame rate low so badly that my turning speed became horrible. And it's unplayable. So now they've done it again, they've made it unplayable on the competitor's cards. 14 frames there is my upper, 18. Now we could say it's because it's regenerating a lot of shaders in these areas for the first time. It is true that it generates some shaders before the game begins, but then it generates a lot of them in real time in the game, and that there are benefits for just leaving the game running in an area of the game overnight and having it generate all the different weather pattern shaders, all the different time of day shaders, so that you don't get caught out on those lows while it ticks away at them kind of slowly, not using all your resources. while you're generating them. So, for example, on that last play session, I changed from ultra down to high for shadows and ambient occlusion, and then that just destroyed my frame rate all through these areas because it was having to generate new shaders. But it still is, and this is the way they left the game with the last PC patch they put out right as they were putting out the Quidditch game, and that's why my GPU memory there was dropping down to 12 gig, and I was seeing it before loading from 12 gig up to 15 gig and then dropping back down to 12 gig instantaneously. Right, they've set it to cull really quickly, and then it leans heavy on your page file, it leans heavy on a bunch of subsystems. And to say this is the worst I've ever seen the game look and run is an understatement. It's been Nvidia optimized, which basically means AMD DE-OPTIMISED, and I can see it. I see it in real time, right? Like, it's all because their new GPUs need to lean heavy on artificial intelligence and the DLSS in order to get the frame rates up high, and so they just use a bunch of math numbers that just destroy every competitor card. I'm not running at 4K resolution. Do not for 1 second think that this is hard settings to run, right? These are settings that I had measured countless times and the performance levels that I needed to select in order to get good frame rates through these areas, and now I'm getting half frame rates because of a bunch of settings that have been chosen by Warner and the industry. So look, getting in mediocre performance is the way of games that you buy can be de-optimized down the track to run worse. At this point, I have no doubt the PS5 Pro version of this game is just stable and beautiful, runs really well, looks really good, and it might be true that you can fake brute force numbers on an artificial intelligent optimized card. That is to say, the Nvidia cards are not built for gamers. They're built for them to leverage themselves into an AI market, and because of that, they're just putting the cost of the silicon on gamers. But they need to lean on certain technologies in order for those cards to now look good. They've actually gone out of their way to pay money to Warner to re-engineer their game to support their technologies, and it is certainly at the detriment of gamers elsewhere. This is a flagship card that, as I say, I'm only targeting 30 frames a second, and I haven't even got the settings set to ultra high resolution, I haven't got the settings set to ultra high ray tracing or anything, and this is unplayable. I don't care what anyone says. It's a further example of why owning a console, there's just no better time in history to shift over to the console market because of anti-consumer movements by either software companies or hardware players who need to sell software. They either need to sell new software or need to sell new hardware. In the console ecosystem, they make money from all sales sold on their platform, so they don't need to break any one piece of software or break any one piece of hardware in order to try to force people forward. So, like, this is just horrible. This is just so much worse than any time I've ever run the game. My VRAM is sitting around 13 gig out of 16 gig used by aggressive culling. I'm shooting up to 14 gig briefly. There's wonderful frame rate lows of 3 and 1 frame a second. As I say, my frames aren't set too high. I've already run around these areas of the game and gotten much higher frame rates at various times a day. By now the shaders should be generated, but because of aggressive culling of the VRAM, I'm back down to 12 gig here on the main street. I used to always sit at 15.5 gig. It would therefore keep several times a day. We're capable in kept in RAM. But the current system is leaning a lot heavier on the CPU, that's evident. It's affecting frame rate lows. One of themselves having set the VRAM memory pool to just aggressively cull down to 11 gigabytes of VRAM right now, right? So it just dropped everything, shot back up to 14, then shot briefly back down to 11, right? Whatever is going on, the amount of generation that's being done by my CPU to mathematically figure out, probably with the Nvidia method of these textures now, is just ridiculous. This game has been de-optimized very heavily. And it's not optimization, this is called de-optimization, right? They're figuring out methods that hurt the market in order to sell the latest technology to people. Anyway, this is atrocious. This is just a for your information video showing just how bad the gaming industry is. PC gaming is for the lose, console hardware is for the win. I wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole.